Good afternoon and welcome to the webinar that we'll be talking about today, maximizing your leadership with Predictive Index. I'm excited to go over this just for a few reasons. One, we're hearing a lot about this from managers wanting more information about their people, leaders inside the company or owners, really taking a look at how to not only attract the right people through maximizing their leadership ability, but once they get them, how do they keep them? How do they keep them focused? How do they keep them engaged? How do they keep them productive and staying on for longer periods of time? So we're going to talk about that today and some tools that we can use with the Predictive Index inside of the Predictive Index software to help you become better leaders and maximize your leadership abilities in that of your team. So whether you're, an HR professional, a CEO, a manager, a supervisor inside a company, I think you'll get some tips out of this today. First thing that we're going to actually start with is just kind of an understanding of what we call talent optimization, right? Maximizing your leadership. We're talking about optimizing your talent. And so there are things that we can do with the Predictive Index and inside the Predictive Index software to make this a little bit easier, but here's an understanding of it. So every year, a company, no matter how big or how small they are, they start with some kind of result that they want. They have to decide what kind of strategy they're going to use to get that result. But in between there, that bridge, so if you look at that picture, the bridge between that is what we refer to as talent optimization. So here's a better diagram of it. So anything inside that between the goalposts there, so to speak, the business strategy and business results, that's what we can help with. Okay. And that's what we can utilize. So if you think of just 4 different buckets inside that piece that we call talent optimization. So getting to the results with the business strategy, that bridge, how do we build that? 4 different buckets. I want you to think of design. Okay. Okay. Design is about aligning your talent strategy with your business strategy. Okay, it's just not a one size fits all. Not every company's the same. If you look at this as a chessboard, okay, where that's going to come up again. How do we structure the organization? How do we structure teams? If we want to be lean and mean and entrepreneurial, we probably want something flatter. If we need to not have mistakes and be highly regulated, we're probably going to go with something a little bit more hierarchical in nature. Okay. So what that does is that sets the tone for the other bucket, so to speak. All right. But it's all about design is all about aligning your talent strategy with your business strategy. The big piece of that a lot of people don't get correct or miss on is the hire piece. So that's that second bucket there. And again, we're going to talk about that and how that makes you or that maximizes your leadership. Hire is all about right person, right seat. Okay, so when we get there, I want you to be thinking about that. Whatever positions are open, think about even inside your company, whatever positions that you might have a lot of churn with, a lot of turnover. Think about those positions, but to always be and also be thinking about the positions where people aren't going anywhere, where they stay, especially if they're good. Okay, where they're staying, and we want to recreate that same thing. Okay, so there's objective data that we can use to make that hiring piece a lot better. And again, maximize your leadership potential. Because if we're putting the right person in the right seat, that's one of the things that cause engagement inside of a company. The next is inspire. And like I said, a lot of managers are asking questions. A lot of companies are asking questions here about, okay, we have people. We're seeing a lot of turnover. We're seeing a revolving door sometimes. But we're also seeing top performers. Are we just running out of top performers? What's going on there? So once we get the right people, it's all about getting the right people, putting them in the right seat, and then giving them what they need to succeed. All right. And we'll talk about that engagement piece in just a second. but think about how more productive you could be if people, your people, as a manager, supervisor, as a leader, if you're giving them what they need. We all know when we get what we need out of the environment, whether it's personally, professionally, whatever, that we tend to do better. Okay. Think about a great manager that you've once had, or maybe that you have now. What are the things that they give you that really speak to you? That's what we want to do for folks. Because when we do that, what we find out is, people stay longer. They feel purposeful. And the last is diagnose. And we're going to give you some tools. We're going to show you some tools that you can use. So if you're a current client, you want to be using these. And if you're not using them to their full potential, you might want to dig into some of these things and look at them a little bit closer and how to move that needle inside the company. If you don't have the predictive index yet, might be a good starting point to reach out and give us a jingle, and we can talk about these things. But that diagnosis is about looking at, all aspects of the business and just taking a look at, is the talent strategy aligned with the business strategy? Do we have the right people in the right seats? Are we giving people what they need? Okay, so that's talent optimization. That's the bridge. So when we look at what is going to make you a better leader, we need to first look at the 4 forces of disengagement. And they're also the 4 forces of engagement. So this is not the end-all be-all list. This is just what we found to be the strong indicators of disengagement or engagement. We've all seen that person that it just has to come to work, so to speak, right? They're just there. They're cruising along, just doing the minimum. Probably nowadays we're afraid to let go of them because they're doing a little bit below the minimum, but we don't have anybody to fit their seat. We don't want those kind of folks. And hopefully you're not that kind of folk. We want, and probably if you're listening to this, we want you to be at that want to line. I get to come to work. Okay. You think about the difference between a want to person and a have to person. That want to person goes above and beyond, cares about the quality of their work. It might come in a little bit earlier, might stay a little bit later. Okay, what that does to that company is, again, if we want to be mean and lean, like I said earlier, if that's part of your strategy, you're going to avoid turnover, but you're going to limit the amount of people needed to do the same work. Okay. You want the right people in the right seat. If when you get them into the want to space, you're going to have things like higher productivity, lower turnover, innovation, goal achievement, purpose for those folks. Okay. I think we can all agree that we want to stay away from that have to curve, but a lot of times we're faced with it. Again, if you haven't heard this from me, if you're a client, you probably have, but it's worth repeating because we all need to pay attention to it. When we get into that disengagement piece, one of the things that we're looking for is the job doesn't fit the person. So we got maybe we have the right person just in the wrong seat. Okay. Or maybe that person just needs to not be there. But a lot of times it might just be wrong person or right person, wrong seat. The second piece that causes disengagement is the manager. And that's what we're talking about today. Like if you're a manager, you can use some of these tools to help yourself, help other people, and maximize your leadership potential. Right? A lot of times we say people don't quit their job, they quit their boss. And that's why I'm so excited to present this today, because when we look at those things, we look at ourselves as managers and as leaders, a lot of these things that we'll talk about today really improve that level of engagement. And then the other two are the team, which we'll talk a little bit about as well, and culture of the organization. We want to make sure we have the right team or have that person on the right team. And vice versa. This works both ways. Okay. So if we have the person in the right job, right manager, a great manager on a right team, fit the culture, then what happens is that want to line goes way up. The engagement, as you can see, goes way up. And that's what we want. We want to be able to do those things. Now, how do we do that? Great question. Think about what PI does. So the bread and butter of the predictive index is the PI behavioral assessment. And that identifies the key behavioral drives for each employee. So you're going to want to use this in a couple different ways. One, to understand the person. Two, to understand the role and match that person against the role. And then also to understand how that assessment, if you're a leader, how that plays into your own. If it's, how do I make that more complementary? And then overall, how does that apply to the team? So there are lots of different tools to maximize your leadership inside the predictive index software that we can take advantage of. Okay, and when we look at these things, so looking at the individual, all right, you break it up, maybe think of it as different channels, but the 4 factors that PI measures: dominance, extroversion, patience, and formality. So when you're looking at a person, I want you to think of even channels. Okay, so the A drive, or that A factor, is idea channel. So think about how people value and generate ideas. The second piece there, you'll see the B factor. I want you to think of as communication channel. How people best communicate. How people best communicate. The next one there is the C drive, which I want you to think of as work process channel. Work process channel. What I mean by that is what kind of work environment unleashes a person's full potential. And then the last one there, the last primary factor that the predictive index measures is formality or information channel. How much information a person needs to make a decision. So when we're looking at all these, you have different people coming in. And first, you have to know yourself. It really starts with self-awareness, which we'll get into in just a little bit. But think of yourself. If you don't have this on yourself, you can go to our website and take the assessment. But if you're one of our clients, what I'd like you to go back to is just to create some self-awareness for yourself around these things. For instance, if you are a leader that's high in dominance, there are a couple things that you might want to be aware of. First, you might have somebody that's also high in dominance, and you're going to have a tendency to butt heads. That might be considered bad. If you can make it a good, that's an opportunity. The opportunity is we butt heads and come together to have a better idea. We challenge one another. It could be like that. You can't do that typically with someone. If you're a high dominance manager, you can't do that typically with someone who's on the lower side of that. Okay, so when we look at that, someone that tends to be more collaborative in nature isn't necessarily going to respond great to someone that's challenging and aggressive and assertive with them. They need and require a more collaborative environment. Okay, so these are things to think about. And again, even if you're a client listening to this, some of these things we overlook because we forget about them, or we don't think they're that bad. Okay, I was in a meeting last week, and I had two high A's, and so 2 high on that dominance channel. We're going after it, and you could see it was making people in that meeting uncomfortable. And the 3 people in that meeting that was making uncomfortable were on that lower side of the dominance. So they were more collaborative, and the 2 got into an argument. One thing led to another. Wasn't a very productive meeting. Okay. But my point was, they've been using it for a while. You should have known that was kind of going to happen, but a lot of times we just forget. Right. So it's good to go back, go over it again, because some things we might not think of as being, like in their situation, aggressive, made everybody else uncomfortable, and it didn't lead to a great meeting. Okay. So the awareness was once there, I think, for them, but for a while, because of the stress and everything, they let it get ahead of themselves. That next factor there that we want to talk about is the extroversion piece, or communication. A lot of companies will a lot of times say, hey, we have a communication issue. All right. And that can mean a lot of different things. It's not all with this factor. But if you look at somebody who's high in extroversion, they need to be in front of people. They need to be around people. That gets them going, even to recharge their batteries. And if you're a manager that's on the lower side of that extroversion, and you don't give that person, the 4 or 5 minutes, just 4 or 5 minutes of FaceTime every day to say, hey, how's it going? Talk through some things, kind of cooler talk kind of things, they might get a little de-energized. On the other hand, if you tend to be on that higher side of that extroversion, and you have somebody that's on the lower side that you're managing and leading, and you're constantly after them and talking to them and not giving them time to think through, or not giving them agenda ahead of a meeting, it's going to be draining to them. And again, I don't want to say that they can't do it. All right. But what we're talking about today is maximizing our leadership ability through these tools. All right. You can do that and you can get away with it every once in a while. But knowing yourself and how you play into these roles that we have with other people is important. The next one there is your C drive, or that C factor that we talk about as work process channel. Again, very simply, I mean, one of the ways to understand this is, if you're low in that patience piece, you're going to want 8 or 9 things going on at one time. To make somebody like that that's low on that patience to just do one thing, to sit at a desk all day long doing one thing. And again, they can do it. But are we getting their absolute best? Or are they staying engaged? Probably not. Okay. And vice versa. If you're having somebody that's really high on that patience, that likes one thing at a time, that's more process oriented, and you stick them inside a situation where it's just hair on fire all the time, and you're totally shifting gears with them all the time and totally interrupting them all the time, they're not going to do well. Can they sustain? They can. But again, we're talking about being highly productive, highly engaged. With that one, even seating arrangements can bode well for your leadership. That person that's higher on that C factor, that patience, keeping them away from high traffic areas, right? Things like that. Just thinking about where even people sit. And then the last one there, I want you to think information channels, formality, the D drive, the D factor of the predictive index. So when we take a look at this, again, looking at your company size, all right, and this is just a general statement. It's not locked in stone here, but a lot of times when we have smaller companies, the leadership tends to be a little light on the formality, which has helped them grow. I'm not saying everybody is, but typically, in general, that's what happens. But as that company grows, the talent strategy needs to grow with it. And that formality needs to move more to that right-hand side. We need more rules, regulations, structure, things of that nature. And a lot of times in growth mode, those two sides, even leaders, if they're on different sides, will be at each other. But a lot of times when that company is smaller, what we need is leaders who are on that lower side of formality. What we need is more structure. And then we try to find it, and then we get frustrated with it when we actually bring it in. Okay. But we actually need it to grow. Now, if you have a department, again, this is where it gets into the talent strategy that I spoke of the first thing when I started this webinar. When we look at if a department inside of a larger company wants to grow, but the company's been around for long periods of time, there might be a situation, and I've seen it before in the past, where that company and everybody in it is very risk averse. And you're saying, hey, I want to grow. Well, you bring somebody in there that's growth oriented, and everybody's not ready for that if you don't prepare them. But the other thing is, you have to align that strategy with what you want. And sometimes that means bringing in somebody that's not like everybody else. And that's what we have to be aware of. Okay. So think about that, and think about that not in just in the individual that other person is that you're leading. Think about it in yourself, what you're bringing to the table. And then what we'll talk about later is thinking about what it is that you want in that role, and then taking it kind of more global into what you need on your teams and what you need in your company. All right. But so before we get there, let's talk about our experiences with our managers. All right. Think about a manager that you least enjoyed working with. Kind of what were their characteristics? What did they do? What did you not like? You know, were they a micromanager? Did they not give you enough details? Did they scream and yell? Was it carrot and stick? Were they not there? Were they just avoidant? Did they not interact? Okay. Could be a plethora of things. And again, best manager ever worked for. You know, a lot of the things that we hear when we hear, you know, best manager, spent time, discussed, communicated, cared, was approachable, gave enough detail, didn't overly micromanage, those kinds of things. Okay. Now, we did do a study at the Predictive Index a while back. Okay. And these were the top 3 traits of ineffective managers. Again, not an all-inclusive list, but let's just take a look at the top 3 here. So this was from 5,000 professionals, basically in order to understand the behaviors of effective versus ineffective managers. Now, when we look at this, 58% don't communicate clear expectations. 57% play favorites, and 55% don't show concern for career and personal development. All right. Now, let me just back up and say I don't think that most managers, because I'm assuming that most of you that are going to watch this are managers, supervisors, leaders inside of a company. Most of us do not do this maliciously. One, we haven't been educated enough, and that's why a tool like this is so beneficial. But the other thing is we're just left to our own devices. So I don't think it's malicious in any way. It's just a lack of self-awareness in ourselves and in others, and we just haven't had it. Okay. Some of it is just behavioral in nature. When I say, don't communicate clear expectations, that could be somebody that's really not high in formality or just a talker. It could be somebody who talks a lot, thinks they might be communicating, but isn't providing the detail. It could be something like that. It could be somebody that's super assertive, super impatient, just rattles off things real quickly. It could be somebody that also is very low on that extroversion scale, where they think it, but they didn't say it to anybody. They didn't put it down anywhere, a paper, on an email, or did not communicate it. So no one knows. They know in their head, but nobody else knows. The playing favorites see this a lot. And again, I don't think this was malicious. If there are leaders out there that do these things purposely, they're very few and far between. Playing favorites, a lot of times it's just birds of a feather flock together. When we see favorites being played inside a company, I said the vast majority of time, way over, I'd say 95% of the time, it's just that person that's the leader's favorite or the manager's favorite is wired like them behaviorally. And I think that makes sense when you look over it. The easiest relationships you're going to have are the people typically that are wired like you. And then the last one there, I think we really need to get better. And I'm going to show you some of the tools inside the Predictive Index where we can get into career and personal development. Again, It's not done malicious. I think we have these conversations, or we don't think we have time for them, or for a lot of managers nowadays, especially around my age group, we just didn't get the training. Okay. And now what's really neat about especially Gen Z, if you look at some of the research that's coming out with that generation, they're really concerned about career and personal development. I've been in interviews, and I have two kids that fit in that generation, and they really are seeking after, okay, what, not just my career, but personal. Can you take that time? But think about what happens when somebody takes time to talk to you. It creates trust, it creates a bond, it creates engagement inside that company. It's harder for them to leave. And we'll talk about a tool inside the predictive index to maximize your leadership ability to do those things, to make it easier to have discussions with people around their career and personal development. Before we do that, again, self-awareness study. So some homework here. This is a TED Talk. It's a fabulous TED Talk by Tasha Urich. She did a 5-year research study, okay, where she looked at, it's called Increase Your Self-Awareness with One Simple Fix. But in that, she looked around people who actually thought they were self-aware versus people that actually were. And of course, the results were astounding. 95% of people thought they were self-aware, but in fact, only 15% were. Meaning that in any given situation, 85% of the people who you're dealing with, leaders included, us leaders included, just don't have a lot of self-awareness. So we have to work on it. So how do we do that? How do we become better and maximizing that in our work environments? One, self-awareness defined 2 components: awareness of one's own behaviors, needs, and drives, and how that impacts others. And there are tools inside the Predictive Index software. If you've gone through the PI Jedi training, this is actually an exercise that we do in the 2-day workshop. But I would recommend that you also do with your folks inside of your company, just to create that awareness. And I would put this in as soon as you could, even in onboarding. You know, I know a lot's going on when people are coming in, when we're onboarding folks, but taking the time to help people understand this, to get some, just to even to see a baseline of where they're at. But for you as a leader, are you self-aware? Now, I'm always blown away by somebody that comes, and it doesn't happen too often, but every once in a while, somebody will say, yeah, I'm totally self-aware. I don't really buy that. Okay. We can always get better at it. The best way, one of the best ways to do that is to understand, again, I made this reference earlier, is when you're looking at your people. So anybody that reports to you, even your coworkers, anybody that you're working with, we have to know how that piece moves. You can't move everybody like a checkerboard. So the quote from Marcus Buckingham was, average managers play checkers. Okay. And I would say actually even below average, while great managers play chess. So the difference is, again, with chess, you know how each piece moves. So that comes to your management style. If you want to get better, and we just talked about this a little bit, if you want to get better at understanding how you're impacting people, remember self-awareness, how you're knowing your drives, needs, and behaviors, but also knowing how those styles impact others. Okay. So if you're highest on that dominance factor, you're going to have a managerial style that's more tell. Again, might work with other people that are like that. But with your other chess pieces, it's not going to be, you're not going to get as great of a result doing that. So you have to bend a little bit as a manager. If you're high on that extroversion piece, again, you're going to tend to be more lively, more selling. If that's your highest drive, that works well for people on your team that tend to be like that. Doesn't work well for those that are lower on that. Okay. Or you're just talking out the side of your head. Okay. Patience, process, okay, experience. Think about what that does for you and your managerial style. Okay. And then formality. It's all about rules, structure. This is where you have to be careful, because if this is your highest drive, sometimes you might get into that lane of being more of a micromanager. I'm not saying it's good, bad, or otherwise. It could be great if you're in a highly regulatory situation, okay, or an environment. That might work. But you have to know, you just have to know what moves my people, right? And a lot of times what we take a look at, and if you're a client, you've heard this at least several times from me, is the platinum rule. Okay. Platinum rule is very simple. Treat people the way they need to be treated for maximum productivity and efficiency. Yeah, we looked at those 4 stages of engagement there, those 4 buckets earlier. A great manager treats people the way they need to be treated. So you have to know yourself, and you have to know how you're impacting others. So jumping from your managerial style now to what those employees need. Look at their highest drives. Okay. And this is a good indicator of what they need. If they're highest on that dominance, they're going to need impact. They're going to need their thumbprint on things. Helping them understand that. Okay. Great predictor of an employee need. B drive, they want feedback. They need that face time with the boss. Okay. Sometimes it's not even, it doesn't necessarily even have to be about work. That's the fascinating piece of it. Just that time to talk and get feedback. If they're highest with that C drive, it takes them time to understand. Right. So you just can't throw something at them and then expect them to come back right away. Give them time. Provide time for them. Give them a process to follow. Or if they're new, if that's something you're bringing in, if you're a small company and you're just bringing in somebody like that, have them and give them room for the ability to create the process themselves, because that's a way to scale, especially for a smaller company. And then formality, give them the details. And this goes, I mean, think about this just from onboarding, folks. Day one, to go over this with somebody, to help them understand what they need, to create that self-awareness for them. Tell them a little bit about yourself. Tell them a little about how you're going to interact with them, what to expect. But somebody where their highest drive is formality, they need details. So a lot of these things that you can do up front, especially in the onboarding, the better off you're going to be. You're going to give them a jump start. Okay. And another reminder, just to know your chess pieces. Platinum rule, treat people the way they need to be treated for maximum productivity and efficiency. Treat everybody the same by treating them differently according to how they're wired. So let's jump from the person. There's a couple more things I'm going to give you about the person that you can find in the software to maximize your leadership ability. But first, let's take a look at the job. So job fit. A lot of times we try to slam a square peg in a round hole. We want to understand the importance of the requirements of the role. What do we need in that role? And again, going through those factors. Do we need somebody that's collaborative? Do we need somebody that's outgoing? Do we need somebody that's patient? Or do we need somebody that's, you know, that every day is different? Do we need somebody that's more flexible? Do we need somebody a little bit more rigid? What do we need in that role? And then matching people up accordingly is very important. Okay. So one of the things that we do, we create a behavioral and a cognitive target for the role. Okay. So we do a job assessment. And that job assessment, that's how we match people up. Now, is everybody going to fit nicely? No. Okay. But we just don't want a complete mismatch. Like, I'm sure you can understand why you wouldn't want somebody that's wired for like outside sales commission role in your accounting department. Again, could they do it? They can. But what we're looking at to maximize your leadership ability is, will they do it, and will they do it well for long periods of time? Because if we put them in the right role, they're less likely to be miserable. And then we can work on the other pieces. The manager, do they fit the team, the culture? How we do that then, okay, the person comes in and we match them up against that role. So what you'll see on the screen there is, in the orange, those orange bands are the role itself. And you don't even really have to know a lot about the predictive index to see there's, this person's a little bit off here or there. And then this interview guide becomes a coaching guide when we onboard them. So if we give them the role, so we brought this person in, we know what to expect, and then we use the tools to maximize our leadership ability by giving the person objective information about who they are. Now, I don't know about you, but in the past, I used to get very subjective feedback from my manager. And a lot of times what it is, and again, it's not done malicious. They just do it on how they're wired. Here, you should do this, this, and this. Well, where are you getting that from? Why should I do it that way? Okay. And a lot of times it's just because that's the way they did it. And I used to manage the same way. What we want is to use this coaching guide and help people understand, here's where you're going to have to bend. Right. So it gives us certain questions that takes a lot of the emotional contagion and baggage out of it. Like, people don't get emotionally charged as much or as often when we can say, hey, look, here's the role. Here's you. Let's talk about these things. Here's what we know to be successful in the role. I'm here to help you be successful. Here are some ways that I think we can do that if we look at the data. So making it more objective in nature. Okay. And again, we talked about this, but just to reiterate, platinum rule: can't treat everybody the same. And that plays into our awareness with one another and the relationship that we have to one another. Okay. A quote from Bruce Lee here: to know oneself is to study oneself in action with another person. Think about your easiest relationship in your work environment and think about the most difficult one that you have. Okay. What we can do, okay, especially with everything going on, coming out of COVID, things are getting busier, things are getting strange. I mean, they always have been. But one of the things that we went over a lot with companies is this relationship guide, especially through COVID. Right? Because it just takes two people and it gives you the relationship strengths. So if you're looking to, how does this person and I, how do we get along? How can we do so well when we're so different? This gives you some insight to it. The other thing it'll do is it'll give you some cautions. Here's some things that you ought to, be aware of. You don't want to step on a landmine if you don't have to. And it's going to give you some tips. So what this does is it takes that relationship and builds it to a point where from where it goes to unconscious competitiveness to conscious complementariness. How do we work together and create synergy in this relationship where these two people, if I'm the leader and I have a person that's reporting to me, how can we make that better? One, as a manager, if I get the right person in the right role, treat them the right way, show them how we're complementary together and work on that, I don't need as many people. So that means I don't have to supervise as many people. It means I can pay attention to the right people. Okay, so this can be used. I like to use this up front in onboarding to maximize my leadership ability, just to get it out there first things first. And then I draw this in quarterly and take a look at this when I sit down quarterly with people. Okay, direct reports. We just go over it again every quarter. And there's some other things that I'm going to show you that we do as well that I think will be beneficial or have been beneficial for lots of our clients. You know, a quote from Simon Sinek: when people are financially invested, they want to return. When people are emotionally invested, they want to contribute. How do you get people emotionally invested? Because when they're emotionally invested, you know, they stay engaged, they stay productive. You don't have as much turnover. You get people who want to refer other people into the company. They want to contribute. So what do you manage? A good question. So we talked about the job. Now we're going to talk about the person. So again, this goes back to that relationship guide. One of the things that I would say to do or highly recommend to do every quarter is this manager strategy guide inside the Predictive Index software. If you're a client and you're not using this and you don't understand it even after today, please get a hold of us and we'll walk you through it again. I think this is a fantastic tool. I know it's a fantastic tool because I've gotten feedback with people, with clients that have used this over the years where they're using it. You know, I would love everybody to use it quarterly because it's specific to the person. So in this situation where you're looking at it, we have Carolyn. This is what Carolyn needs in her environment. So she can basically every quarter check the boxes. Does she get it? Does she not? Right. And what I would do is I like to print 2 copies of this out, one for Carolyn, one for me, her supervisor. And it's like, are you getting these things? You know, I'm kind of checking the boxes too. And then we're comparing notes. So on 2 separate pages, we're comparing notes once a quarter. How can I help you, Carolyn? How can I help you get better? You know, are there things that I'm not doing or I'm not giving you? How can we get more in the environment for you to stay engaged? Right. And not only that, this makes it easier for your managers who don't know how to have these kind of discussions. I love these kind of discussions, but it's more my background. But I have run into a lot of companies who even have so-called coaches, you know, meaning they're designated, the leaders are the coach of somebody else, but they don't know how to have the conversation, so they don't have it. This gives you that platform to have that. This is 2 sides of the strategy guide. Again, phenomenal tool that we need to take a look at. You know, if you do this every quarter, think about what you can avoid. You get ahead of the issues, the problems, the challenges that a person might face when they're thinking, oh, I'm going to leave. I don't, you know, they come to you instead of once a year, every 90 days and say, hey, look, you know, it's maybe not the right role for me. I'm thinking about doing this or that. You know, I'm not getting this out of the environment. You can get ahead of those things and you can develop those people. I want to go back to a comment that I made earlier, especially around Gen Z, when we talked about ineffective managers in a study that Predictive Index did. When we take a look at that, this is your development platform. Okay, it's not hard, doesn't cost a lot of money, you know, to do this and to do it well, to sit people down and coach them on how to do this with their employees, how to coach managers on how to do this with their employees. There are companies out there that are doing it. They're doing it quite well. And what they see is the effectiveness of their leadership. They're getting feedback from their employees. But the other thing that they're finding is their people are staying more engaged. Their engagement rates are a lot higher. than typical. Okay. And people are doing great work. They're being productive. So that's a good tool to use. If you're not using that and you're a client, definitely use that. If you'd like to see a demonstration with that and you're not a client, please reach out to us. And then the last piece of this webinar, we're really talking about teams. Okay, that's one of the pieces that you have to fit. All right. This goes against, this goes into what we talked about earlier. What is our business strategy? What does our talent strategy need to be? What kind of teams do we want? All right. Give a quote from MJ, one of the greatest of all time, the GOAT here. Talent wins games, but teamwork and intelligence wins championships. I mean, a lot of great people around him, no doubt. He was a fantastic ball player. Okay. But what if we had different ways to look at teams? Okay. If it's a new team, if I'm coming into it and it's new, if we don't know, but what we have the ability to do and what's going to impact your leadership ability is looking at all your people. Okay. And instead of just kind of willy-nilly trying to figure out, I'll take this person, I'll take this person. Why? Again, use the data. Be objective with the data. So I'm the person. And then what we have is not only the person, but the type of team. Is that person right for that team? What we have in the software to maximize your leadership ability is we have all these team types. So we can identify what kind of team it is. Is it the right team or do we need to change it? And then we can be objective in changing it or switching course. Or maybe it's a department in a section of a company and we need to create one for the same kind of team in a different part of the company. Now we know what we're looking at. Again, taking the data and making it objective. Okay. So I know that was a lot, but when we think back on it, just think about those things. If you want to be more effective in your management style, in your leadership ability, if you want to maximize your leadership, just using these simple tools. Okay, a lot of times when I go over these kind of things, even with clients that have been clients for 10 or more years, they're like, I'm still not using the software to make the biggest impact. There's other things, like I said, that I went over today that you can go over. Understanding the person, but first understanding yourself. It starts with self-awareness. Then you have to take a look at your roles. Do we have the role? Do we have it clarified? And do we have the right people in the right roles? The next step is that inspire piece. Treat people the way they need to be treated for maximum productivity and efficiency. Platinum rule. Looking about how we coach people, how we coach them towards their role, looking at the coaching guide, the tools inside the predictive index, using them up front, especially in onboarding to make sure we're starting out quick out of the gate. And that includes that coaching guide, that includes a personal development guide, that includes a relationship guide, that includes that manager strategy guide. And then lastly, don't forget, they have to be on the right team. So look at using that information and looking at how to maximize my leadership ability by putting people on the right team. When you get that right, you're really starting to move up and really generating some good steam and maximizing your leadership ability utilizing those tools. If you have any questions, you can reach out to us at centerforvictory.com. If you are a client, you can either email me or your consultant or call us. All my clients should have my number, but if there's any questions, please reach out. Hopefully you enjoyed this and just continue a great practice and to maximize your ability to lead.